I was sitting in my private Gulfstream G700, hovering above the clouds like a god on vacation, when I received an email with a single sentence: "They know about Noisy River, Reed." It felt as if someone had momentarily turned off gravity, and I, Reed O'Connor, a Wall Street legend whose fortune was measured in billions and whose influence was measured in laws passed, felt for the first time in 20 years not triumph but pure, cold fear, seeping through the Italian leather of my seat and straight up my spine like an ice injection, making the luxurious cabin suddenly feel too cramped and unbearably quiet. Noisy River is not just the name of a provincial project, it is my most carefully hidden, most cynical triumph, which cost me only a small piece of other people's dignity, but guaranteed me a place among financial titans. And now that this ghost has climbed out of the tomb, I understand that this is not just a threat, but a direct invasion of my perfectly constructed, 100% American myth of the self-made man, created on the principle of the one who grabs faster wins, and consciences for the weak. I stood up, walked to the polished window, and looked out at this boundless ocean of clouds, indifferent to human tragedies, and at that moment I felt it sway not the plane but my fundamental American belief that success justifies any means, that wealth is an absolute shield from consequences, from moral calculations, from painful memories of how 18 years ago I had abandoned dozens of families to their fate, making them believe in a fake project to build a hydroelectric power plant in that forgotten hole. I dialed my lead lawyer, Fisher, and the voice that had always sounded like a velvet command was now slightly hoarse, taut, like a steel string about to snap, and I only heard his slow, foreboding sigh in response before he uttered a phrase that sounded like a death sentence to me, even though he was simply stating the fact: "These aren't hackers, Reed. These are the same girl. The old farmer's daughter. She's an attorney now, and she's filed a federal lawsuit. We're being charged with intentional environmental crime and aggravated financial fraud. She's not asking for money, Reed. She's asking for the public truth." In that second, I realized that my golden cage was turning into a prison, and all my grandeur was just a fancy facade about to crumble under the weight of my old, long-forgotten guilt, and the only thing I felt was anger at her audacity and the first, burning sense of defeat. I returned to New York immediately, and my Upper East Side apartment, usually an oasis of control and impeccable taste, now resembled the headquarters of a besieged general, with Fisher and a team of lawyers scrambling around trying to salvage some of my shattered reputation, while instead of leading, I felt for the first time in my life like a helpless pawn watching his pieces rapidly being taken out of the game. My attempts to solve the problem the old, tried and true American way, offering the girl $50 million to shut up and disappear, were scornfully rejected, and that was worse than any financial loss, because it was a blow to my fundamental belief in the omnipotence of money, to the axiom that had guided my entire life: every man has a price, every problem a check. She said her father died a year after we closed that project, Reed. It wasn't about the money. She called it retribution, not compensation, Fisher croaked, wiping his sweaty forehead, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of what was going on inside me: absolute terror at an enemy that didn't play by the rules of capitalism. The lawsuit set off a domino effect that was destroying my life with surgical precision. The media, which had always sung the praises of my charitable foundations, were now printing headlines about Noisy River and the 10-year conspiracy, turning me into the archetype of a cynical, callous billionaire, and the largest institutional investors, smelling the scandal, began to withdraw assets from my holding company en masse. But the real blow came not from without but from within, from my wife, Alice, who, after 20 years of a perfect, if soulless, businesslike marriage, looked me in the eye with such icy disgust that it became clear to me that she no longer saw a billionaire, she saw a liar and a thief hiding behind a brand of success. "I knew you were cruel, Reed," she whispered in the empty living room, where the million-dollar works of art seemed like silent judges, "but I didn't know you were a petty criminal who ruined the lives of ordinary people for an extra 5%. You didn't disgrace me, you disgraced the whole concept of who we were." That conversation ended with her disappearance along with half of our joint property, and at that moment, standing on the ruins of my life, with almost $1 billion written off my accounts and my wife taking away the last shred of the illusion of family, I realized that my American dream, built on lies, had shattered to pieces, leaving me alone in the void, with a painful, bloody loss, the loss of self-respect, which was my only currency. I sat in my penthouse, which now felt less like a fortress and more like a trap, staring at my bank statements that showed a catastrophic decline, feeling my titanic, ever-unwavering American entrepreneurial spirit finally give way under the weight of moral reckoning, when a number called my cell phone that surprised me. It was Gregory, the former engineer on the Noisy River project whom I had fired 18 years earlier for excessive integrity when he refused to sign falsified environmental Reports. I hesitated for a long time before hitting the answer button, knowing that this call from this man was either an attempt at extortion or a chance for real, cynical salvation, since Gregory was the only one who knew all the technical details of my scam. "I know what you're thinking, Reed," his old, tired voice said over the speakerphone, and there was no anger or accusation in it, only a deep, almost biblical sadness. "You think I want revenge or money? But I'm calling because I'm tired of you, Reed, and people like you, using the American spirit as an excuse for pure, unadulterated plunder. You've turned the pursuit of success into an indulgence, into a meanness. And I'm tired of watching it." Gregory had suggested that I meet him in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, a place as far removed from my world of luxury and indulgence as possible, and when I got there, I saw a man I barely recognized. He was dressed in shabby clothes, but his eyes burned with some strange, unyielding inner truth that seemed almost alien to me, a man who had lived a lie for years. He handed me an old, battered flash drive and said, "Here's the original data, Reed. Not about the finances. About the environmental damage. We really did destroy that river, and you knew it. I can prove that your legal team deliberately destroyed the evidence, and that will give us a defense in court, showing that you were the victim of a conspiracy by your own corporate lawyers who wanted to protect their reputation, not you. But there's a condition." My heart, which I had long believed had become a financial instrument, not an organ, began to beat wildly. "You have to go to court and tell me all about the financial manipulation and how the system works. You have to be a witness to the truth, not just another victim. You have to destroy not only your reputation, but the entire system that allowed us both to lie." In that moment, holding in my hand the forbidden knowledge that could save me, but at the cost of self-destruction in the eyes of the world, I realized that this was not just a legal salvation, it was an invitation to moral suicide, to a great discovery. The only way to save Reed O'Connor, the human being, was to kill Reed O'Connor, the billionaire. The next 2 weeks were filled with an internal struggle that was far more brutal and exhausting than any corporate war I had ever fought. I stood at a crossroads. On the one hand, there was the opportunity to keep a significant portion of my fortune, avoid criminal liability by using the information provided by Gregory to shift the blame to the lawyers, which was technically true, and stay in the game, albeit with a tarnished reputation, but still rich, influential, and by American standards successful. And on the other, there was the path of open, devastating repentance that required me to admit not only to the crimes but also to an entire philosophy of life based on exploitation and cynicism, which would inevitably lead to complete bankruptcy and, probably, prison time, but at the same time would give me the clear conscience that I had lost early in my career. My old American mentality screamed, "Survival of the fittest, Reed. It's their fault. Take the best option and move on." But something had changed. The image of the farmer's daughter, her principled defiance of my billions, and the weary gaze of Gregory, who had chosen poverty but retained his dignity, were eating away at my bronze statues of success. I remembered how my father, a simple worker, had always said, "Success, Reed, is not how much you have in the bank, but how much you can give without regret," a phrase I had discarded in my 20s, replacing it with the cynical Wall Street formula, "What you give is what you lose." And now, at this point of absolute failure, I realized that all my greatness had been an illusion, that my American dream was just a gilded version of greed. I had decided. I scheduled a press conference in the same room where I had once announced my biggest deals in charitable foundations, and when I stepped onto the podium in front of dozens of cameras, thousands of eyes waiting for the usual statement about legal error and competitor machinations, I swallowed the dry lump in my throat and began to speak not as a financier, but as a person speaking the truth for the first time in his life, with pain and anger directed at himself. I didn't come here to make excuses, and I didn't come here to shift blame. I'm guilty. I knowingly destroyed the ecosystem of the noisy river, and I knowingly defrauded hundreds of people for my own personal gain. My voice broke, and those words, spoken out loud, in front of the world, were not just a confession, but an act of complete destruction of my former self, a culminating moment when I chose to lose everything for the one thing money couldn't buy, the chance at redemption. My confession caused seismic shifts. The stock market reacted by crashing my company's shares, the federal authorities launched a full-scale investigation, and I was almost instantly indicted. But contrary to the expectations of all my former partners and enemies, I felt no fear or despair, but only a strange, almost unbearable relief, as if a multi-ton, golden burden of false success that I had carried for years, considering it my only value, had been lifted from my shoulders. I sold everything that was left, voluntarily compensating for the losses of all the affected residents of the noisy river area, and even those who did not file a lawsuit, leaving myself only a modest apartment in the city center and the minimum necessary for living, refusing the services of expensive lawyers in order to cooperate with the investigation as much as possible, because for the first time it was more important to me not to win, but to be honest, before the law, before the world, and most importantly, before myself. On the eve of my sentencing, I received a letter from the girl, now a successful lawyer, whose unyielding will had destroyed my empire. It was just a few lines, handwritten. "You could have bought us, Reed. You could have destroyed me like you destroyed the river. But you chose the truth. I think my father would have forgiven you. And thank you for showing me that not everything is for sale, even in America." I was sentenced to 3 years in prison for financial fraud and environmental crime, and as the doors of federal prison closed behind me, leaving me in a gray world devoid of gilding and false glitter, I looked at the walls not as Reed O'Connor, the billionaire, but as Reed, who had finally bought his freedom, paying the only real price for it, everything he had, and giving up his ego. It was a painful but profound lesson about the American mentality, about how the pursuit of success, when divorced from morality, turns a person into a monster, and wealth becomes not a tool, but a prison. Standing at the window of the cell, looking at a small piece of sky, I understood that the only real success I had achieved was the ability to admit my guilt, to sacrifice everything to find the truth. I lost billions, influence, family, but for the first time in my life I gained something much more valuable: peace and the knowledge that I could still be honest. Is it possible to be rich and honest? Perhaps so, but I understood that wealth acquired by dishonest means becomes a curse, and the past can only be redeemed by a complete, uncompromising renunciation of its fruits.